We're back out here at the Big Lake once again, and today we're talking about where to find those springtime bass on windy days, on calm days, and on days in between. Stick around, you don't want to miss this one. There we go, I got him. Whoa! And here is this video's featured comment. Congratulations! If you would like to have a chance to have your comment featured in an upcoming video, all you've got to do is leave a comment. And now, on with the video. Welcome back to Lowbrow Fishing, and as April moves into May, that weather largely remains unpredictable throughout the spring, especially as it pertains to the wind. Before I head out to the lake, in the night before and the morning of, I can check that wind report and I can see what it is, but by the time I get to the lake, it's completely wrong. Now, I don't fault the weatherman because it's been said that it was easier to put a man on the moon than it is to predict the weather. But that still doesn't change the fact that that is what we have to work with when we get out to the water. You know, like the old saying goes, you have to fish the water that you're given. And that goes for the weather and everything else that's included. But that's okay. We have the tools, we can adapt, because what we're looking for is current. That's the number one thing that we need to focus on whenever we're dealing with wind, whether it's a lot of wind, whether it's a little bit of wind, or whether it's a complete lack of wind, especially when that water warms up. Now, how am I dealing with current? Well, there are two real ways that I'm going to deal with it, especially on a day when it's pretty blustery and that wind is blowing pretty hard. I will be looking for something like a main lake point, and this is something you can do from the bank. Bank anglers, you can do this. You can get out on those main lake points and you can see that wind coming around that main lake point and blowing that current. And on the back side of that, you see that point acting as a breakwall of sorts. It's acting as a breakwater, and you can see a complete line of slack. That's important. Those are going to be the sorts of places that I'm targeting. Why? Because largemouth bass like to hide in those current scenes. Anything that's going to have a fast current going by and giving them an opportunity to dart in and dart out. Think about how largemouth bass relate to a shade line, hiding under a dock, looking out into the sunlight and spotting prey. They treat current very much along the same lines. They're looking off into that current, they see what they want to, they dart in, get what they want, and they come back out. Now, smallmouth and spots, they're very different whenever it comes to relating to current. A smallmouth, well, you can never find enough current for them. They will be out in the middle of the worst, roughest current and seemingly have a good time. And spots, well, they are closer to smallmouth in that aspect. They may not be as current happy as smallmouth, but they definitely don't shy away from it either. But largemouth, while they're not going to flee and shy away from current, they don't want to be right out in the middle of it if they can avoid it. They would rather set up in places that are a lot more calm, places where the current is still accessible to them and where they can go in and get what they need from it, but also have safety whenever they come back. So those are going to be the places that I'm going to look for. But whenever I'm starting my day, I get out on the water and I notice how windy it is. I want to know which direction that wind is blowing from, because that matters. If you're on a natural body especially, but if you're on a highland reservoir or something that is part of a river system, this may not help you so much, but it's something that I've noticed on a lot of lakes that I fish, is I actually go toward the wind until, well, basically I run out of water. I want to go to that source. And you'll find that a lot of times the wind isn't as strong there, the current isn't as strong there, and the waves certainly are not as strong there. That's basically the start of it all. And for me, it's a good place to set up and start working. I get a good feel for which way that current's going, how it's flowing, and since I know how that current is flowing and where it's going and how strong it's going to be, that gives me a really good idea of how those bass are going to relate to it. So it gives me a great starting point. If you are able to go into the direction of the wind, whether it's north, south, east, or west, go until you run out of water essentially, and then turn around and let the wind carry you back that way and start your journey. As we talked about in the last video, we start by gauging how those bass are, the mood that they're in, how they're feeling that day. And if we've got a lot of wind on that day, if we've got a lot of wave action on that day, we've got a lot of moving current, well, I'm going to be going with something like this, a bladed jig. In this case, this is a Berkley slobber knocker. Now, I'm going to be using a larger one. This is a 1/2 ounce. I may even go up to a 5/8 or even a 3/4 ounce, depending on the wave action, depending on how strong that current is. I want to be out in the thick of it and drag it along those seams. I want to keep my bait in that current, and I want to present it along those current seams so those bass have to come in towards it. I don't want to cast past them and then bring it through into the current. I want to stay in the current and then bring that bait past them, and I need a heavier bait to do that. But since I'm working in the wind, since I'm working with a lot of current, and there may be some stain to the water, I want something with a lot of thump, and I want something with a lot of flash. Something like a spinnerbait is also an excellent option. It doesn't have to be a double Colorado blade. A tandem blade should work just fine. Again, white is a great color. If you have a hard time picking and choosing colors, always start with white whenever it comes to a bladed jig or a spinnerbait. It's a great basis, and it'll give you a great place to start, and you'll be able to catch fish nice and simple. Silver blades, gold blades, I don't really much care about that as much as I want to start with a white spinnerbait. That will generally mimic most prey species in most bodies of water. Whether it's shad, whether it's shiner, whether it's perch, whether it's goby, it really doesn't matter. Those bass seem to like white as far as, well, soft plastics, but also for a spinnerbait. So that's something that I try to pay attention to, something that I really want to make sure that I've got tied on. Now, if we're dealing with something that's a little bit less current, a little bit less wind, if it's, if it's not gale force, if it's something that's in that 5 to 10 mile an hour range, it's got a good breeze blowing, it's pushing my little boat along, well, then I'm going to have something like a lipless crank tied on. And it doesn't have to be really big. This is more of a 3/8 size. It's not quite a 1/2 ounce. This is a Cotton Cordell Super Spot. You guys have seen these. These are the ones that I modify myself because, we've got a lot of pressure on this fishery, and I'm trying to stay a little bit more subdued. But I still want a moving bait. I still want something that's going to have some rattle, something that's going to have some flash. And again, I'm going to be fishing this right out in the middle of that current. I'm going to be fishing it the same way. I'm going to be dragging it by those current seams, trying to entice those bass to come out and get it. I don't want to be passing them up and going out into the slack water and then reeling by them, because 9 times out of 10, those bass are turned around facing towards that current. Just like we talked about how they will take a shade line and they'll face out of that shade line, looking out into the sunlight, looking for their prey, looking for their food. They'll be in the current a lot of the same way, darting in, picking up what they want, and then coming back out. Now, one of the things about this, working this lipless, and I'm going to kind of give a little bit of the juice here, one of the things that I like to do is I will actually work it a lot like a jerkbait. I will burn it a little bit, stop it, and then I will jerk, 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 reel in the slack, reel it up just a little bit, and then pause it, and then jerk, 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 and then reel it a little bit. It is a great way to catch bass. If you try hard enough, you can pretty much work anything like a jerkbait. You can do a lipless crake like a jerkbait. You can do a square bill like a jerkbait. But I really like the action that I can get on a Bill Lewis style rattle trap. Those types of crankbaits, whether it's a Cotton Cordell, whether it's the Bill Lewis rattle trap. But that style of lipless crank is really what lends itself more to being able to be worked like a jerkbait. Something like that red eye shad style. They've got a great fall and a flutter, but I find that they don't jerkbait nearly as well as something like a Cotton Cordell. So that's going to be my little secret to you. If you have not tried that technique, I'm telling you, give it a try. You will love the results of it, because I've gotten some monster strikes. It's really an erratic type of action. And if you're following those current seams, if you're following right along those break points where that current can, it can slack up some, and those bass are going to rest in that area. They're going to set up in that area. They're going to be looking for that. I'm telling you, a jerkbait style lipless crank that's coming by all herky-jerky and whatnot is a prime target. Now, lastly, one of the best places to look whenever you've got current flowing and you're finding main lake points, one of the best things that you can find is places where current is mixing, right? Say you've got a southern facing main lake point, something that's facing south to north, and you have the wind coming out of the north, and it's kind of blowing, but around that point, it kind of mixes. Or you have two creek channels that are coming down and meeting at a main lake point, and that current is mixing as it heads out into the main lake. Where that current is mixing, there's going to be nutrients stirred up. There's going to be all sorts of small bait fish, and if there's going to be small bait fish, then there's going to be bass not very far away. You can count on that. So that's going to be one of the best, most ripe places that you want to target. If you ever see a place where there's mixing current around a break, around a pile of timber, around, a big ball of grass, around a main lake point, around a series of man-made structures, some riprap bank, that's what makes things like bridges so good when it comes to fishing, right? Not just the riprap bank under them or the fact that it can serve as a pinch point, but it can also act as a place where current can mix on either side. So not just as a pinch point, not just as the pilings or the pylons, fishing around those areas outside of underneath that area, beyond the riprap bank, beyond the pilings, is a great place where you can find some really great mixing current. And again, that's going to be a place where those largemouth, and even down here in the south, where those spots are going to love to set up. It's an easy meal for them, so those are going to be the place they target. So those are going to be the places you want to target. So there you have it. Whether there's a lot of wind, whether there's very little wind, you have the tools to go out there and catch bass regardless. Pay attention to the current and watch how it's interacting with the environment. I guarantee you the bass are. And if you can find those current seams and those places for the bass to hang out, you can have one of those amazing days that you talk about all year. Thanks for watching Lowbrow Fishing. We'll catch you in the next one.